most important part is the people that you're working with, and alignment is what empowers everyone. I don't think people don't burn out from working hard. They burn out from working hard and not seeing any return from that. And any effort around alignment really helps to illustrate that. And I know we're, again, an unsanctioned implementer, but EOS has been the number one way I've found to drive this, where just maybe it's transparency on like what the work we're doing on a weekly basis, how that's translating to the overall business. And that in every case I've seen empowers people. They're like, yeah, that thing I worked my butt off on last week, is actually that is moving the needle on these metrics that we're tracking, and it's impacting everyone in the company. And maybe on the RevOps side, like the extra effort put in on the sales process to make it easier for the customer success team, and vice versa, customer success getting involved in the sales process to help maybe close deals.
Sean Steigerwald, thanks so much for joining us today on the RevOps Champions podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I don't even remember how we were connected, but you're the CEO of Customer IQ, which maybe for our listeners, a lot of whom are either using HubSpot or are very interested in using HubSpot. Customer IQ is an integration with HubSpot. You're on the HubSpot app marketplace. And I believe, HubSpot is the leading CRM that you do integrate with currently, even though you also integrate with Salesforce.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
That's
so tell us a little bit about Customer IQ. Let's maybe start with industry, because that always seems to be one of the things that, again, is helpful for our audience. What are the industries that are currently using Customer IQ, and maybe a little bit about why certain industries use it and others don't?
Sure. Yeah. So our main industries right now we broadly bucket as complex sales, and that can mean anything from enterprise SaaS is our largest, but also professional services, manufacturing, anyone that has many touches in a sales process, and also captures a lot of detail in the CRM, because the main two things we do are CRM data entry to a really deep degree, and then also email automation. So helping sales reps get emails organized and replies and follow-ups out quickly.
Okay. So it's really that complexity that is the common denominator to your ICP is they have a complex sales situation with complex needs from the seller's perspective. Okay.
Yeah, they're capturing a lot of context in their sales process, and then there's also we do a lot of email drafting to speed things up. Our kind of whole goal is compress what is usually a long, complicated cycle.
Okay.
And so to draft the right emails, they need specific knowledge and domain expertise that we can layer onto the AI. So a lot of cool things around there.
That sounds very cool, and it's actually very similar to, so we don't work. I mean, we've worked with a bunch of technology and SaaS companies, but our focus is more on manufacturing and franchises. And one of the reasons for that is because of the complexity that like in the franchise space, for example, as well as in the manufacturing space, there is, we prefer to work with companies where there is complexity, because that's where they need more help, and the value in figuring it out, of course, is that much higher. What would you say is the reason that companies are adding Customer IQ, in this case, for example, to their HubSpot CRM? What is the main driver?
Yeah, the main one is certainly the enrichment of the CRM. So I think universally we can all agree it is a pain to update fields in the CRM, especially after calls and emails as a busy sales rep. And in a lot of these more complex sales, or really any sale that requires precision, there's a lot to update. And the CRM is a wonderful thing, and HubSpot, especially with all the workflows and even on the Salesforce side, when you have the whole ecosystem of things you can plug in, they're all powered from that data. So you can't get around it. And there's this new wave of AI note takers and tools that help to record conversations like this one, and then put these awesome summaries in the CRM. And that's a great start. But what Customer IQ is doing is kind of going to the nth degree, and we actually populate any property. So drop downs, open-ended text, multi-selects, any property that you need to update in that CRM to build lists or power these workflows. And so that's the main reason people would come to us.
So essentially, are you saying that people could actually replace, Fathom, or which is what we use, or the bunch of other, AI note takers? They could actually replace those with Customer IQ, but then get more than what the others do?
They could, yes, especially on the sales side. So the people on the front lines having, and I shouldn't just say sales, also revenue team. So customer success, people talking to prospects or customers, where it's important to capture the detail and then update something in the CRM, and really something more than just summary notes. That's really where the key is there.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm hearing is a lot of it is saving sellers time, right? Is what it comes down to.
Yeah. The whole goal is to compress the sales cycle, and we look at it from, you asked me some great questions before this, and one of the things I've learned over my career is that the best sales teams just kind of do the hard work really well over and over. So we're not trying to reinvent a sales process. We've just looked at what are the small, annoying, tedious things that happen in just like call it a traditional process. And it's, after a meeting, writing a great follow-up, going and getting helpful content to put into that was asked about on the call, writing follow-ups in general. So if you haven't heard from someone, following up a couple times just to stay on their radar, updating the CRM with good, concise detail, and updating all the properties so your marketing team can help nurture. All of these things we've kind of broken down brick by brick. And if we automate those, the result is a compressed sales cycle, but you can still run the same process. You don't have to learn new methodology or a whole new technology that's going to change how your sellers go to market. So
that was really the drive for you and your team as you sort of started Customer IQ was lengthening sales cycles is one of the most common challenges that a lot of businesses have, especially in more complex sales cycles. So would you say that was the problem you were really setting out to solve?
Yeah, to be honest, this is my third company, and the biggest motivator to starting it was really playing with these new large language models. I would love to sit here and say like I was just sitting and I thought about sales cycles and how we could disrupt everything. That would be probably a better story. But really, this is a rare case. I think it was a bit of a hammer in search of a nail, where the first thing I noticed is you could take a ton of text and parse it pretty magically in any way you wanted, and it took almost no setup. The deeper we went into that, we realized you could do some incredible things if you added the right context around this. And that led us to working in sales, because my whole career I'd been doing some version of sales marketing or product, just as a founder of these companies. But and then we just looked at like, what does everyone hate? Everyone hates typing into the CRM. Data entry is something almost no one wants to do. And then what is AI uniquely good at? It's now generative and can type these things in and parse the text, and it also never forgets. So if you take those two things, what can you help in a sales process? And a whole bunch of customer feedback, and we landed here.
Right. So maybe that might be helpful, actually. So let's go back as far as you'd like, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. So what is your background? And that might be helpful to understand like where you are today and why you're here.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a serial entrepreneur now. This is technically my third company, the second one that I've been the founder of. I started my first company right out of undergrad. I went to NC State in Raleigh. My first company went through many different iterations. At one point, we were doing basically early stage investment syndicates. So got to learn a lot and work with a lot of early stage companies, and kind of learn almost basically from an investor perspective what it's like to work with all these different companies. And then that evolved into a SMB mid-market analytics tool. So we did a lot of business intelligence and kind of financial reporting around these small businesses and working with their advisors. And then we sold that in 2021 to a commercial finance firm. And that's where I spent the last 3+ years, where I got to learn a lot about how the commercial finance world works, and especially around equipment finance. And we built a great platform to originate loans and manage a lot around that. And all along the way, through both of these experiences, I was doing most of the business development around whatever we had built, kind of coming up with a lot of it, working with the development teams, but then actually taking it to market. So learned through those different teams and stages a lot about revenue operations, and informed really everything we've done today, Customer IQ.
So in your previous like roles and businesses, how far back do you go with RevOps? Because again, so I would say, maybe 60% of our audience are very familiar with RevOps because they're running RevOps, and then there's maybe another 40% who are either not aware of it or are aware of it but are not really, they're not using RevOps as a model in their businesses. How far back do you go with RevOps?
Yeah, I don't know if this makes me like an OG, but I remember when HubSpot introduced the CRM. So I don't know. I actually don't know how long ago that was, but I was one of the first adopters. Immediately, they hooked me with the free CRM as a small startup, and ever since then, I've kind of obsessed over how we can use tools. And honestly, HubSpot has taught me most of what I know about inbound content marketing. And then through workflows and just figuring out how we could do things more efficiently, I think I just went for the school of hard knocks on the RevOps side. I don't know that anybody has any sort of formal training in that, but I learned it mostly through that ecosystem. So that was easily 10 years ago. And it's
I mean, I guess the very first, very simple version of the HubSpot CRM was launched in 2014, but it really, which is 11 years ago, which is crazy. But because it was a few months after we became HubSpot partners is when they launched it, and that's actually been it's interesting you say that, because that's been very much our trajectories. Like, as when we first became a HubSpot partner, was very much focused on how do we enable marketers to be more successful so that they can help generate leads for sales and what have you. But as HubSpot built out their product into CRM, sales, and service, we just realized that was where we needed to be, and where businesses really, that you want to have a completely aligned system if you want to be really successful completely. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's go back to Customer IQ. So who is typically ideally your internal champion for Customer IQ? Again, so the scenarios, again, most likely your customer is using HubSpot or Salesforce as their CRM, and they're now implementing Customer IQ to do all the things that you just talked about, as far as compressing the sales cycle and just really helping salespeople spend more time on strategic selling versus all the menial tasks that have to be done by something or someone. So who is your ideal internal champion?
Yeah, it's certainly the leader of RevOps. So whether it's a VP or people who do RevOps, COO, a smaller company that might be leading that. But it's anyone who's building the connections between revenue teams, account management, customer success, and how all of those systems might work more efficiently. One of the bigger benefits of automating CRM data entry is not just lifecycle marketing, but also how do you hand off a customer once it's closed to customer success. So anyone who's concerned with that intersection of teams and how they work is our number one. Okay.
You reminded me of as you were responding there. So for example, in SaaS, everybody knows what RevOps is, right? I've never met a SaaS company who doesn't know what RevOps is. And that's obviously where RevOps started, and then it kind of moved across industries. Professional services, again, there's some more, some level of understanding and use of RevOps. But in manufacturing, we found that we're having to educate our manufacturing clients or even prospects about how RevOps sits on top of the CRM and all the other tech stack. What have you found? Are all your manufacturing clients, for example, customers, are they already familiar with RevOps, or does it not really matter?
No, you're exactly right. I have to be careful with this. I know there's RevOps champions. I'm in the RevOps mindset, but Sales operations often also, and something maybe related to that, sales enablement. And then you're right, in manufacturing, it could even be something in accounting, where sometimes the people that feel the pains that we solve are in the, like responding to quotes or requests for quotes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all this data has to come together really quickly and get sent back out to the salespeople to send to the client. And oftentimes there's a high volume of that. So we do have to be careful about who we're looking for then. But luckily, if you kind of start from the pain of CRM data entry, there's a lot of people involved in that. So we can find our way.
Yeah. We're seeing, very similar things, like in for example, in manufacturing companies or some of the larger professional services companies, like a 500 or 1,000 person architecture or engineering firm. We're often dealing, if it's not a revenue leader, it might be, to your example, it could be a CFO, or in many cases the CTO or CIO, the IT leader, because ultimately what it all comes down to is operational efficiency, right? And it seems to be owned by different people in different organizations. In some cases, on the revenue side, it's the revenue leader who's responsible for, operational efficiency within revenue. But then in other times, it's across the entire org. And of course, both work really well as long as the focus is on operational efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. It can be a challenge. We often say we work with salespeople or people who do sales. And that's really when we're thinking about professional service, where especially smaller firms, these are just partners and managing directors. It's kind of whoever's leading the charge. And they have the unique challenge of they have to do sales for only 20% of their job. And then it's, fulfilling the service that they're selling for the rest of the time. So, they have other tools and processes that they use in addition to us often, but as much as we can automate of that too is the value there.
Yeah. So Sean, let's maybe switch gears quick. So one of the reasons we started this show was, we've seen across industries some businesses or teams perform, way outperform others, who from the outside look like they have all the same things. They have the same headcount, they have access to the same capital, they have access to the same talent, they have access to the same operating systems, CRMs, whatever. But still, some completely outperform the rest. In your experience, and go back as far as you like, what differentiates teams that have the ability to scale better than others?
Yeah, I have, most of my companies have been smaller and have experienced some great growth, and also plenty of times where we've failed a lot. So I've learned from that. And then I've also, in some of these companies, gotten to work with many others. So when we were on the investment side, we got to watch a lot of companies scale to a very large degree. I would say every business is different. The thing that I have taken away from all of these lessons is that I would say there's no silver bullets, but there are lead bullets. And the best teams just do the hard work over and over and over again. I think they often have the benefit of I come from startup land, so product market fit is a big buzzword, where they found something that was a huge need and they're solving it really well. But then they don't have some crazy hack to, drive this tremendous, traffic at the top of the funnel, and then all of these AI agents, to move it down through the funnel. It's really just that they're taking like the blocking and tackling that has worked for 20, 30 years, and they're just executing on it, and focus, I think, is the other side. But I'm just always surprised. I ask friends that run or work at some of the fastest growing companies I know what they're doing from a go-to-market. And it's cold calls, it's cold emails. It's these things that are declared dead every 2 weeks. But the best companies just ignore it. They focus and they keep executing.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a lot of successful entrepreneurs would say that, because we've all heard, strategy is king and culture is king and whatever. So what you're saying is that execution is king?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think strategy is important. Having a system, really important. And I know we'll talk about that. Yeah. But I think it's also really easy to hide behind that work. And the teams I've seen that struggle are way over indexing on strategy, operations. You almost always have a growth problem, like a revenue problem. Your revenue solves everything. So when you're not experiencing that, it's really easy to fall into, well, we need a better system, we need better tooling, and often it's just you need better execution.
So okay, so let's just say so a company is doing that. They're executing, but they eventually hit a ceiling, right? So in order to scale to the next level, they need to execute differently. What in your experience, what seems to be the thing that they do differently when they break through that next ceiling?
Yeah, I think that is where the system, like the kind of the operational excellence, will come in. And I don't think it's quite as complicated as a lot of people would lead you to believe. But maybe that's because I've actually always been a fan of EOS, and I know we've talked about that on this show a number of times. I got really lucky. I think when I was probably 23 or 24, I had an advisor. I wish I remember who it was, because I would thank them, that said, just read this book, run this, don't think about anything else. Like, this is what you need to know about running a business. And it's been so true now that I've worked with, I don't know, 10 or 15 other companies closely around this, and I've recommended it to people. In a lot of ways, I've been kind of like an unsanctioned implementer, I think. I don't know if they'll love that, but I have introduced EOS to a lot of people and shared spreadsheets and resources. That has always been the thing that has gotten teams unstuck when they hit plateaus. And I think a lot of it comes around from just being really clear about what each person's role is, what they're going to do on a daily, weekly, quarterly basis, and how that all ties to the broader vision and goals. I think often it's stuck because you just start spinning your wheels around, like, where you're trying to go to this big, hairy, audacious goal, and you don't just have the daily, weekly scorecard to look at what should we be doing and who's doing it.
So that definitely makes sense. And in EO, but even within EOS, you sort of, they break it down into the 6 components, which it doesn't really matter what the operating system is, whether it's EOS or something else. The components are always very similar, right? It's always, there's a component of people, there's a component of data, there's a component of execution, or in the case of EOS, traction, and of course, then there's always a component of process. So you're saying that to break through that next ceiling, because EOS has these 6 components, that if you focus on each of them and keep them balanced and keep moving them forward, that will essentially drive your growth.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I've always been in smaller companies, so I can't speak to very large organizations and how this might happen. But in my experience, whenever we would hit plateaus, it was always that we just needed to do more of what was working and less of what was not. You're always running experiments, and just being honest with what we thought might have been a golden goose or a silver bullet, didn't turn out, but we're still, the customers still love this thing that we do over here. And maybe our problem is we just haven't been loud enough about all of that success, and we need to just refocus on that. And I think the EOS model has helped me in the past to identify that, where just looking at the things that we're doing on a weekly basis, and is that actually changing what our quarterly objectives are? And if not, then maybe we're doing the wrong things. And it's just a great system to identify that before you're in a desperate place.
Right. It sounds like you don't suffer from shiny object syndrome.
Oh, I do. That's why I know so much about this.
Okay.
Yeah, I you could ask my current co-founder and CTO. He was probably getting a lot of these shiny object messages earlier today. So I'm making this sound really good, but I at least know when I'm going astray. It might take me a day or two to come back, but I'm as bad as anybody.
I mean, I think that is the struggle, especially for a lot of visionaries who typically are a founder or a co-founder, is that we have too many ideas, but we need to make sure that we have people who can make our ideas real, so that they can recur, right?
Right. And I tell you, it's as hard as ever in today with AI, and that not just the capabilities that change every day, which is a whole bucket of craziness that you can come up with all kinds of ideas, but also just watching how fast some companies are growing. And we're early stage, and comparison to the thief of joy. But it's hard to ignore just how just amazing some of these companies are being built. So you're always kind of questioning, like, are we on the right path? Are we doing the right thing? And then a week goes by and Sam Altman tweets something new and everything changes. So yeah, it's a wild time.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, but yeah, I think it's also very exciting, and I think if we maintain our excitement around it, we'll eventually, get to where we're going.
Yep.
So so when we talk about RevOps, we kind of break it into 4 areas, like the 4 pillars of RevOps. For us are people, process, data, and then technology. And it is in that order. I mean, it definitely starts with people and it ends with technology. And we're talking about shiny object syndrome here. Unfortunately, we still see it all too often, and we're guilty of ourselves. Where when you're trying to solve a problem, it's like, oh, there's a tech solution for that, and you go and buy the tech solution, but you haven't actually thought through, well, what are the KPIs or metrics we're driving, and how does it impact our processes, or have we even mapped our processes manually, right? Does that kind of gel with how you think as well, or how do you think about RevOps being successful, or do you have any other sort of a different matrix to think about it?
Yeah, definitely. I am a huge proponent. I imagine most people are, but I have learned this lesson time and again of where we need to build the process, and it can be painful. We just need to make sure that it works before we automate anything. Yeah. And it even comes down, you think something as simple as like workflows in HubSpot. You can even burn a lot of time building that out before, and then you turn it on and it didn't actually do or deliver the thing that you wanted it to do. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I myself have spent more time building an automation than it would have taken me to just do the thing probably 100 times. Yeah. So making sure that we, like, spreadsheets is the best software ever created. So start there. You could probably do most things. You just solve it in a spreadsheet. And I like to see that we're kind of putting that into practice, doing the workflow manually. We're also learning what's valuable about that by doing it manually. And then if it continues to work, then we automate.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice. And it seems somewhat ironic, coming from someone who sells the technology solution, but it's because that your technology will never be successful if your customers haven't thought through and made sure that the processes work and that they actually know what data that they're tracking, right?
Right, exactly. It's interesting. We are in an interesting place where, because of where we sit, we help to basically parse conversations. We can also see broadly, like, we have a good understanding of what happens after the conversation. So after a meeting, what are the tasks that someone needs to go do? And we actually do run a pretty in-depth analysis on what those tasks are. And that is how we set our roadmap, more or less. It depends a lot on the vertical that we're working in, but the benefit of that is that we kind of have data to support that. Okay, this is a part of the process we should automate because people are doing it, each time, and they're doing it many times. So interesting place, and it's kind of fun as an entrepreneur, because we don't have all the answers, but we do have some pretty good data that we would never had in really any other type of business.
Right. Yeah. No, that is true. So while we're on this topic, I mean, to sort of expand a little bit, what goes into your decision to implement new technology? I mean, you've started talking about it now, where start with a spreadsheet. But how, what else can you tell us about how long it takes for teams to do that, and then how do you think about the time that it should take for the adoption of technology to automate otherwise manual processes?
Yeah, I guess I try to prioritize just by what we are doing on a daily basis, and this is what I tell our customers as well when we're going through an implementation. We've invested a lot. We can be and will be better, but we've invested a lot of time already in making it as simple as possible to implement. And then we try to stick to solving things that happen on a daily basis. My first company, we did a lot of high-level analytics, and there's a ton of value in that, and it's needed at a managerial perspective, but it's not done every day. It's done like monthly or quarterly. And just getting into my next thing, I wanted to make sure we were focused on workflow. It's, I think, more rewarding in a lot of ways, but it also checks the box on what we're talking about here, on like, is this useful? Is it something people should automate? Do they do it every day? If so, then yes. And then we know we can compress the overall time if we help them save a couple minutes, couple hours on a daily basis. So we always just recommend doing that. Just looking at what you're already doing, and then working to improve that, not trying to like reinvent a process or system because a new tool has a way of doing it. I know that's maybe a hot take. There's a lot of great tools. We use a few of them that are really opinionated, and they kind of come with this new framework and methodology on how to use it. I do think it can just be a little dangerous because then you're learning two things at once: a new system and a new technology.
Yeah, and you know your business better than they do or anyone else does.
Yeah, if it's working, don't change it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really like the way you talked about workflow there as a manual concept, because in the work that you do and the work that we do every day, workflows have become synonymous with a technology automation solution, right? Or let's say an automation solution. But I like the way you're talking about it. Really, you have to be able to understand the workflow manually, whether it's on a spreadsheet or a whiteboard or whatever, before you start to automate. It's just interesting how workflows are now really more synonymous with an automation than an actual workflow.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think because we've never before been able to automate so many things so easily, it's really difficult for anybody to identify what are the tedious things on a daily basis. Like once you see it automated, it's easy to look back and be like, oh yeah, that's really helpful. But it's amazing, even just talking to users, how you have them walk them through your day, and it's even difficult for anybody to identify that. Like, yeah, I do open that spreadsheet and it takes a long time to load, and it takes me 5 minutes to go get that number, but it's just what I do every morning. Yeah, it's a fun place to learn.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot on this show about data and technology being either assets or liabilities, and I think this is essentially what you're alluding to. Is if you don't think about it the right way, then they can very quickly become liabilities, because you've made the investment for the wrong reason, or you haven't stuck to essentially the framework that you're describing, which is understand what the manual workflow looks like and how it should look like for you to be successful, before you start automating anything. And of course, but then the data component also is what let's talk about the data component. When you're working with a new customer, how often do you need to really ensure that they're actually tracking the right data?
Yeah, I love the question. I'm sure you experienced this too with CRM implementations. I feel like CRM is the epitome of this challenge, where you'll have executives that are like, we need data and we need it. And it's really hard for some teams to articulate why and what they should be tracking. So they just track everything, and then nobody uses the CRM. And then you're like, all right, we just spent all this money and time and it's empty, or I guess worse, a total mess. So we do spend time to try to help people identify what are the most important things for us to track. And really it's back to what I said earlier around, if you have a sales process and then you win the sale and you want to hand it off to your customer success, and in subscription companies, which is most of what we work with, like retention is really how you win the game. You might have spent a lot of money to acquire that company or that customer, so now you need to retain them for more than one renewal cycle. So customer success is so important, and CRM is a huge part of that. Like, how do we not just repeat our sales process to learn what problems that they're trying to solve and how we position ourselves to solve it, and instead hand that off to the team. So helping teams to think through that, like, what are the actually most important properties to capture on a deal? What do we need to know about a contact? What do we need to know about an account? And then that's what Customer IQ will listen for and parse out of the conversations, and then package up and hand to the CS team.
I'm glad you went there. As you're thinking about the sales team handing off customers to the CS team, first of all, are you familiar with if you are, do you use the sort of the bow tie funnel concept?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
So, which is, again, is, and HubSpot talks about this a lot, and we talk about it as often as we can. But at the end of the day, I think what it's about is the most valuable customer is the one that you already have, right? Whereas, I mean, this is changing pretty dramatically and has been for the last few years. Probably since COVID, it was another accelerator for that. But before, too many businesses was still focused on just net new sales, but not realizing that those customers were actually the best evangelists for their product. And again, if CS is able to do the best possible job, and they can then hand this back to marketing, and then of course grow existing customers versus just focusing on selling to new ones. So the bow tie funnel is essentially, you take the old, the original sales funnel, you turn it on its side, the sales funnel, of course, starts with marketing and then, or outbound, whatever. But you get a customer, that customer becomes the center of the bow tie when you flip it around. But then the real value is how you keep that customer and grow that customer over time. And so essentially saying that the value of that customer is far bigger than what it was if you're just focusing on the sales funnel. Anyway,
I love it. Thank you. I needed to learn that. We'll use that because that certainly aligns with what we've seen, and it's what we do at Customer IQ too. 2/3 of our customers expand in the first 90 days, so it's really important for us to nail it with the first team. But then also, once that happens, we almost always start with sales, then they move to customer success, and sometimes it's vice versa. But we see it live every day.
Yeah, and we see it, just using the three industries or verticals that you talked about, SaaS, professional services, and manufacturing. All of them could most likely do a better job on growing existing customers, and it's of course it's a much better investment too, because investing in net new customers, of course you have to do it, but the return on investing on existing customers is always higher. So
yeah, absolutely.
So it's not only something that you and I should do in our businesses,
right.
but it's a big part of what we're also coaching our clients to do over time, and ensuring that they're doing it if they do it right. Which of course comes back to the importance of the alignment within RevOps, of aligning marketing, sales, and customer service, and then so that they're essentially, it becomes a flywheel. And it's really hard to do when you don't have that alignment across those three teams within the revenue team.
Anyway. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's why RevOps is so important, because from a sales perspective, you've got your quotas and you have a tremendous amount of activity that you have to manage. It's not even in your job description to think that far, and I don't know that it should be. And then on the customer success side, you're kind of left holding the bag if it doesn't go so well. So it's so important to have the RevOps teams connecting these dots, making the systems work, and now moving that data through. I mean, makes sense,
right? Yeah. Sean, another question is, so a big word that we do talk a lot about, but we should talk about more, because like if you're working with it every day, you kind of, what it's like. You just kind of think, well, everybody knows the importance of alignment is the word, right? How do you think about alignment, and is it something that you think about a lot, whether it's a result of running the EOS process or anything else in a business, whether it's your own business or in your customers or people business? How important is alignment, and how do you think it impacts scalability and growth?
Yeah, I think it's almost everything, especially when it comes to, I think the most important part is the people that you're working with, and alignment is what empowers everyone. Where I don't think people don't burn out from working hard. They burn out from working hard and not seeing any return from that. And any effort around alignment really helps to illustrate that. And I know we're again, an unsanctioned implementer, but EOS has been the number one way I've found to drive this, where just maybe it's transparency on like what the work we're doing on a weekly basis, how that's translating to the overall business. And that in every case I've seen empowers people. They're like, yeah, that thing I worked my butt off on last week, is actually that is moving the needle on these metrics that we're tracking, and it's impacting everyone in the company. And maybe on the RevOps side, like the extra effort put in on the sales process to make it easier for the customer success team, and and vice versa, customer success getting involved in the sales process to help maybe close deals. That is a challenge I don't have a clear solution for, because I think those two teams, it's always around incentives, how you design incentives to really align them. And that, I'm sure you do a whole show with people much smarter than me on that. I'm sure it's something we've always searched for, but a fun problem to solve.
Yeah, it does seem to be one. It doesn't come up often enough, but once you start peeling back the onion, it's often that becomes the issue, is that especially as teams have grown and from whether it's from 10 to 50 or 50 to 500 or 500 to 2000, whatever it is, one of the things you don't realize over time is what had to change and what needs to change. It's and again, a system, whether it's RevOps or EOS or any kind of framework or model, is there to to prevent you or to help you from not having to reinvent the wheel every time you have to go through a change, because you do. If you want to grow, you have to change.
Yeah, and giving a purposeful platform to bring those issues up, like that. I always think about the L10, and the vast majority of your weekly meeting is spent on just discussing issues, and so it's just giving yourself your team at any level the platform to say, hey, like, we have a churn issue, and I don't think it's a service one. It's product or marketing. These are bad fit customers. It could be any number of things, and alignment is somewhere in there and solving that problem. But just the first step is you got to get the issues on the table.
Yeah. So you've talked about the people alignment piece, and I do agree that EOS is a fantastic solve for that. I mean, we use it too. But how do you think about the alignment of processes across teams, or the alignment of data as marketing hands off to sales, and sales hands off to CS, and then hands it back to marketing? There's they each are tracking different data. Oh, and we were talking about the incentive piece. Incentives change as teams change, and as team mix changes, you have to change incentives. But what I think where a lot of companies, and pretty much anyone listening who's been through this identifies with this, is like you cannot just change incentives in one team without impacting the other. So you really have to change incentives all at the same time, and that's a really hard thing to do, because messing with people's incentives is hard. But again, to your point, I think EOS is a very helpful tool there, because you're removing emotion from those decisions. It's like, well, this is what we have to do. This is the solution. I mean, obviously people are often part of that solution, but it's like, we have to solve this, because what worked in the past isn't going to work, is not going to serve us going forward. But on the alignment of process and data, and then of course ultimately technology has to be aligned as well across. I mean, ideally, so for example, on the manufacturing side, we're integrating with the ERP, because the more aligned you are across the organization, the more successful you'll be. Again, moving back up from technology to data, the data flows and it's available to everybody, no matter where they're sitting in the organization. And then, of course, the process aligned as well. The more aligned you are, the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's why CRM is just so incredibly important. And I say I relate that to ERP in some businesses, but it's kind of the gift and the curse. Like, you can align, and you should align by just everything revolving around that central point. I mean, it's why that HubSpot in introducing the CRM 10 years ago is so brilliant. Is it just that's my answer for everything. Like, you can have the process in the EOS, and that is probably maybe most important, but all the data needs to be in the same place, so the teams are working from the same data set. And you'll see teams come in and we're an app partner, and people will start stitching together a lot of different technologies because they get one feature here and another feature there. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, at what cost? And it's usually at alignment over the technology and the data, and making sure it's all on one. Really, now it's become like a customer data platform more than just whatever the CRM was 20 years ago. It's not just a sales tool. It's how we know every touch point that was with a prospect or a customer, and we all have to revolve around that.
Yeah. The terminology is not helpful because, I mean, it's actually, I talked about this recently where CRM is sort of getting back to what its original meaning was, which is, customer relationship management, which ultimately, if you're satisfying taking care of the customer, the business, everything sort of flows from there, to your earlier point. Whereas unfortunately for there was a period of 10 to 15 years where a CRM was really just being used as a prospecting tool, which is not what it was originally designed to do. So it's kind of, in a way, it's nice to see it come back, but unfortunately, it's still dragging some of that baggage of people just see the CRM as a prospecting tool, not as a customer platform.
Yeah, and I'm really fascinated by this. I think the dawn of AI has introduced this idea that we could reimagine the CRM, and I try to track that as closely as I can because I think it's a cool idea. I think a current problem is because of what we're talking about, where it's the nucleus of an entire company. It doesn't really fit well to like the lean startup model and a lot of how software has been built over the last 10, 20 years, where the CRM is just a beast of a tool, for any company, no matter the size. So I'd be interested to see how this changes over the next couple of years. HubSpot and Salesforce making a lot of innovative moves, but also seeing seems like there will be something different here in the next couple of years, and I don't know what that looks like, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we're all following very closely, was it impacts every single one of us who believe or who need to use something like a CRM to align our teams, our data, etc., and our processes. Sean, so as we wrap up here, do you have any other thoughts, and if or otherwise any advice for our audience as they think about maybe come from the perspective of you're typically integrating and becoming part of a bigger tech stack. You probably face tech. You see tech bloat as much as we do, and you already alluded to this earlier, where what happens 90% of the time is companies they buy additional technology, but they're not actually getting rid of anything.
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about that, but also, if you have any advice in that regard or otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want this to be self-serving, so I'll explain a little bit about like why we focus on workflow. And I'll say, I think moving forward, what's the frontier of technology, like AI and these new tools that have come out, for the first time ever, it can help us do things. We don't just throw data in a database and now we can understand it better, which is a lot of what SaaS was over the last couple years or decades. It was just kind of how do we organize data better and then act on it. Now, like the software can actually work for us. So really thinking critically about what does our team do on a daily basis and how can we help that? In a lot of ways, it seems like kind of a travesty to see some AI tools where it's like, we will help you build reports, and do these things. Like structured data and report tools still have a place, and they still do a better job than a chatbot does when you want to look at how the organization is performing. But what you can do now that you couldn't ever do before is move the needle on all of those, those dashboard charts and say, like, what are we doing to make that go up and down? And how can we use AI to do it better? And I'd say that if you kind of think in that lens, you can narrow the very broad base of, like go-to-market tools and tools available to RevOps professionals down to maybe things that are more useful. And maybe useful is the key word, like things that we will use every day and help us do these parts. I don't know if that answered the question, but just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think I love that. In fact, it's given me a whole bunch of other ideas. It kind of, I think it gels really well with where you started, which is just keep things simple.
Yeah.
And I always think of the analogy of a pilot. I think we all remember the first time we walked onto a jet, and you typically walk up the left side or the they call it the port side of the jet, and you look left and you just see all these dials and you go, oh my gosh, how did these pilots must be so smart? And of course they are, but they've got to be so smart to know which buttons to push and dials to turn, at any particular time. But if you speak to a pilot, they apparently only think about three things, and which are their three metrics, their three data points, and only if those data points are high or low do they start to dig into, well, why? And I think it sort of fits really well with what you're saying, is like, just keep things simple, which means you need to know what data you're tracking first of, and if you don't, then you're flying blind, or you're making it really difficult for yourself and your team to know which buttons to push.
Yeah, definitely. I love that analogy too. I'll have to learn more about that. I don't know anything about flying a plane, but I feel like I'm close now.
Well, I'm sure someone can do a better job than I do. It just helps me when I'm reminded by people like you about the importance of simplicity, because I can also tend to overcomplicate things. But so thanks for that. Maybe one last thing, Sean, any books or podcasts you're currently reading, listening to, that you would recommend our audience take a look at?
Yeah, I usually trend towards the kind of like the high level entrepreneurial podcasts. Like Invest Like the Best is one that I love. Acquired. I geek out over kind of the history of different businesses. So Founders is another great one. That David Senner, the guy that runs Founders, is inspirational in how passionate he is about what he does. So if anybody is interested in any type of history, I would recommend that one.
Okay. And then do you have any go-to leadership or business books?
I've been just kind of like voracious on the podcast front. My favorite book from a business perspective was probably About Hard Things, which I think that was when it clicked for me that usually you're the hard thing is almost always the right thing to do. And what your gut's telling you, like, you should be doing, you should go do it. And then be really transparent about it, because people get really inspired by just knowing what's going on and why the work we're doing matters and what it impacts and so forth. So I learned a lot from that book.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's one thing I wish I'd learned earlier in life. Was I always avoided doing the hard things, and then I realized that actually it's the hard things that makes you, that help you grow. But
definitely, very stoic of us to believe that. That's the other. If I'm not listening to business things, I'm listening to the Daily Stoic. So a recent believer.
Yes. Yeah. No, very good. Well, Sean, thanks so much for joining us. I really enjoyed meeting you, and I look forward to future conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.